Welcome to the University of Michigan Sports Management Summer Lecture Series. We hope you're all well. My name is Barry Klarberg and I will be your host today. Today is our part 4 series of a 6-part set, and our topic today is money in sports. With 4 months in, COVID-19 has cost sports more than $6 billion and 116 million fans in attendance. Lost revenue for non-game day events such as concerts account for $1 billion more. Despite early success stories, including the Big East and Wimbledon, the jury is still out on how event insurance will help sports recover from the pandemic. When insurance claims are filed, some will undoubtedly be denied, and the two parties could end up in court. The Houston Rockets last week and 20 minor league teams in Major League Baseball have already embarked in lawsuits. It's estimated that there are over $1 trillion of business interruption costs per month due to COVID. In addition, we have seen that each returning sport requires a separate renegotiation of their CBA before the players return to the field. On the microeconomic front, the S&P 500 has dropped 34% in the first month of COVID, including 10% in one day. However, through today, most of the 34% was eventually recouped. Finally, the U.S. government provided businesses with over $1 trillion of relief. However, it is estimated that this money will fund those businesses only through the end of this month. Today, we welcome Dave Howard, president of Epic Select and former president of Madison Square Garden, Jaymee Messler, co-founder of Collaboratory and the Players Tribune with Derek Jeter, and Jason Bell, managing director of Regal Wealth, formerly of UBS. Dave, let's just jump right into it. We had a number of conversations in the insurance area. So from you, who went from corporate sports to the insurance side, the Wimbledon earned around 160 million in media rights, 150 million in sponsorships, and around 60 some odd million in ticket sales annually. The tournament organizers have the foresight to spend about $2 million per year, approximately 32 million over the last 17 years in pandemic insurance following the SARS outbreak in 2003. Their claim, and that was paid, was 142 million from this year's canceled tournament. While it will save about $38 million in prize money and staff, there's a huge significant loss of income. From my knowledge in my dealing in terms of tour cancellation for concerts and music acts and sporting events, you look towards weather as being one of the main reasons why you take out this type of insurance. Having seen the fallout from the world during COVID, how do you see the business interruption insurance in the industry moving forward?
Thank you, Barry. Wimbledon is actually a really good case study that demonstrates the incredible expertise that we have within Epic and Epic Select on this specialty area, which is event cancellation, non-appearance, or contingency coverage, which in the sports and entertainment industry, that sort of supplants the general business interruption coverage that you see in a lot of business policies. But you look at the Wimbledon folks, and the media has been, and a lot of people have been very positive that they had the foresight to get the standalone policy following 2003 and the SARS pandemic. But they paid a pretty high premium for that coverage. And particularly when you consider the time value of that money over 17 years, I'm guessing if we gave Jason Bell $2 million a year over the last 17 years and asked him to invest that, he would have a number that my guess is starting to approach what the benefit was in terms of their claim. So yes, they had the foresight. The way they went about covering the risk was probably not ideal. Our team on the Epic side, led by Roger Sandow, who is one of the global experts in this area, has had similar circumstances with some of our clients. And their approach and strategy has been to negotiate out the communicable disease exclusion in the policy. And they've been successful in doing it heretofore. And in fact, we have a client that has a major event with similar exposure to Wimbledon that we were able to negotiate out the communicable disease exclusion. And as a result, they were fully covered. Their claim is actually higher than the Wimbledon claim. And there was no additional premium cost. So it's kind of interesting the way things can be handled depending upon area of expertise and advisory. And if we had represented Wimbledon, they'd be in a better situation net where they are today.
Got it.
However,
Go. Yeah, no, go.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say you're leaning to going forward and all. I mean, right now you're looking at all these bubble sports that are coming together right now. As talking to a number of clients in the last 24 hours about how is it going there. And listen, it's the conditions are good, but they're not great. But what I'm hearing is the leagues themselves are bearing this risk of loss going forward. Like insurance companies are just like, hey, if you want to do this, you want to take the risk, NBA, we're not insuring this. We're not jumping on this bandwagon. The risk is too high. I guess when they figure out when risks exceed 30 to 40%, it's not really worth taking that type of risk. And that's something that we're just going to have to bear as a sport going forward. But I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're right, Barry. It's not unlike terrorism, the terrorism exclusion situation following 9/11 in 2001. Before that event, terrorism wasn't really considered a common peril on a broad scale. It has, after that event, it was essentially comprehensively excluded up until the markets recovered. And COVID-19 is clearly a similar situation. It's not insurable at the moment. It won't be insurable heretofore. Communicable disease exclusion negotiations are going to be very complicated now going forward. So you're right. Leagues, especially with the restarts in the NBA, the NHL in particular, what MLB is doing, insurance is not an option, but the whole risk management, risk mitigation exercise is still important. And they've taken obviously very significant steps with regard to their health protocols and their testing and all their, both with regard to the players as well as their staff. The bubble is obviously a very significant risk management, risk mitigation effort. Remarkably, when they were planning this, Florida looked like the ideal place to locate it for the NBA. Now it looks like it may not be the best location, but they seem to be doing well. It is something that eventually the underwriters will see the opportunity and a market will develop. They will apply actuarial science. They will see the opportunity. It might take a year or two, but the market will develop. In the meantime, we have to counsel clients that this is a new risk, particularly the whole notion of governmental shutdowns on a massive scale in response to either public health or other potential global risks or threats. And the key is start always with the contract, try to eliminate, reduce, shift risk as much as possible in that initial contract, then explore what insurance, co-insurance, self-insurance opportunities there might be in the short term as the markets recover.
It's interesting. A couple things that you had mentioned and all, and I talk to my clients and friends and family, like life insurance. It's like I tell clients when they sign up for life insurance, I said it's one investment you don't want to make money on. You really want to lose money on your life insurance. If you think about it, you're only going to get paid if you die. So you really want to outlive your life insurance. It's every year I pay my life insurance premium. I'm grateful because it means I lived another year and all. The insurance costs, I remember back in the terrorist world, my last office when I was at Deloitte was in the Trade Center. And I remember booking tour insurance for the boy band in NSYNC, the first bands I've worked with and all. And they added like a 20% premium for this terrorist, insurance and all. It was like a surcharge and all. and I would discuss it with the band members and all. And I said, they said, what are your chances? What are the chances? And I said, I don't know. I didn't think our chances were that high going into this. But in most cases, we didn't take that type of insurance. We've never had any type of, since 9/11, that nothing ever that serious and all. But it's interesting what's happening now in terms of the way that the sports are looking at in terms of their revenue share models and all. Aren't we almost like self-insuring ourselves with the players? Like the players themselves, we'll go into this a little bit later, but we're on the insurance, question right now of, what type of risk what you're taking is the players themselves are sharing the revenue, true revenue share, so at the end of the day, I mean, I was working with a pretty prominent NBA player the other day, and he had to take 25% of his salary and had to be placed in an escrow account. And he's sitting there on, millions of dollars waiting for the profitability of the bubble to come to fruition. And once we have those numbers, there'll be a sharing of that number. So I guess what's really happening is that although the bubble doesn't have external insurance, it almost has internal insurance other than baseball. And we'll go over that a little bit later in terms of their lack of true rev share in the model. But basketball player, they're taking the same financial risk that if something happens again and they have to cancel it, they're just going to get less money. What's your thoughts to that?
I think that's generally true. The NBA in particular and the NHL is a very similar model. I think we all saw in the last several months that those negotiations and discussions at our restart were relatively harmonious because there is total alignment of financial interest there. They're essentially 50-50 partners. The players essentially get 50% of the industry revenue in payroll. However, where the risk lies is in the guaranteed contracts, right? Guaranteed contracts, the risk then shifts to the owners in the league. Now, with regard to some of the younger players that are coming up, and we saw some of the conversation where some of those players that this offseason are eligible for a Supermax contract, they were a little reluctant to go back in because they didn't want to expose themselves when they have this opportunity. That's where the risk is on the player, notwithstanding that the league, generally speaking, is sharing the risk with the players because it's a 50-50 partnership. But that's where the advisors, the agents, the wealth managers, the wealth advisors of the players, business managers should be stepping in and should have had a program there to protect them against any type of loss of use, whether it be injury or other circumstance where they might be precluded from that significant windfall. But I look forward to talking about this issue more generally because Major League Baseball clearly has some challenges in this area, and I don't want to dominate the conversation at the outset here.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was in a discussion with the NBA this week and all. We have a client who, for financial reasons and tax reasons, got a significant signing bonus as part of his compensation. And they're like, you need to give some of that money back. And I said, it's a signing bonus. He said, we don't care. It's compensation that we're paying the player. And I said, it was an inducement to sign the contract. It wasn't based on contingency on playing the game. Why are we touching this? You have no right to touch this. And basically they forced me to double down on his salary. And they said, fine, keep the signing bonus, but we want more from here.
Wow.
And it was a negotiation that went on. It was a pretty sizable number. And, listen, at the end of the day, the player landed up backing down some bit because he wanted to be out there and play. But it was a decision that we made at the time. And you brought up another interesting point there is that, a lot of these bubble athletes right now, you almost have to look at it as what the same as a collegiate athlete would look at going into a bowl game. If this is going to affect my future going forward, during this bowl, if I'm in a situation that I'm increasing my risk of injury, I'm increasing my risk of, catching the virus and all, it puts limitations. There's an element of risk there that it's an uninsurable risk. And I think it's interesting that these are the things it's questions that I never thought I would be negotiating last week. And I was right in the midst of it. I said, this is pretty intense stuff. Like this is, and the players, the union had their point of view, and the leagues had their other point of view. Jaymee, let's turn the conversation over to a question to you and all. And we know, we both know a guy named Rob Gronkowski who made about $54 million playing in his 9 years to date. It's to date because he's actually came back and he's going to play more years and all. So eventually get closer to 10 and all. And basically he didn't spend much of his NFL earnings, and he relied a lot on his endorsement money. And a lot of companies like Nike, Tide, Monster Energy, they all jumped on his bandwagon. He's on TV right now doing a number of things. He has solid financial advice. And he basically said once, he said, I just want to be comfortable. I don't want to be crazy here, and let's just save the extra. You've been in the business for a while now, working on the player side originally and all. If you're an agent, you were part of one of the more prominent agents in the industry, would you sit there and you go, okay, guys, salaries are going down, salaries are going to go up? What are you thinking? I mean, you did a lot of work with baseball, and you worked with Derek Jeter for years and years, and you started the Players Tribune with him. What would you say? Would you say, listen, guys, like, be prepared for changes in your salary, or what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think regardless of the current state of sports, I think athletes are super smart to be thinking about how to maximize their revenue off the field, off the court, especially while they're playing, because obviously being able to leverage their influence and their platform while they're able to play, while also understanding that time is their biggest commodity and staying focused and thinking about their brand. I think you're starting to see a lot of athletes think that way. I think it's very impressive that Gronk did it did think in those terms, because he's one of the few athletes that really was able to do a lot more endorsements in this day and age. I think that brands are starting to realize that traditional endorsements are so inauthentic. And now that storytelling has become such a big, important way for athletes to elevate their brand. And when you see, like 5 years ago, there were maybe 5 buyers in sports, and now there's over 20, 25 in terms of original programming. You're starting to see brands as well as athletes either work together through authentic storytelling, but you're starting to see that be the place that people are spending money, spending more time. We did a lot of that at the Players Tribune. Before I started it, a main part of my job was to help maximize revenue for athletes and help them manage that. And you were starting to see that all these brands that spend so much money in sports, their marketing dollars were going down. We were always trying to get creative on how to connect athletes and brands together in a more authentic way. So Blake Griffin is a good example. Back in the day when he was in the rookie game, we did a deal with Kia, and that was like a very authentic way for a brand to work with an athlete versus just a traditional spokesperson. And I think with Players Tribune, we were able to take all the digital dollars that were going up when the traditional marketing dollars going down, and connect brands to athletes through these authentic stories. And that's where you're starting to see people like LeBron just got $100 million for his company. That is all about storytelling. You saw the Michael Jordan doc series do so well. Tom Brady just did a big deal with ESPN. And I just think that's where athletes are starting to get creative and take advantage of, more innovative income opportunities. From a salary standpoint, I don't think they're going to go down as much. I think this year is an anomaly, and that's why you're seeing all of the NBA players in the bubble and going through everything that you just discussed, because they're trying not to lose money because they still have a television deal to fulfill. But I do think once we're back to a little bit more normal, even if not as many people go to live events, start getting more normal, and the leagues and the teams are going to make up that revenue in other ways. It's
interesting. You talk about Derek. Yesterday, Kevin Garnett came out. Apparently, the Minnesota Timberwolves went on sale last night. And he immediately tweeted he wants to be a partner. He wants to be an owner of the team. You know, we see that a lot, you know, of players want to cross over to management, and very few actually do it. Were you surprised that Derek became an MLB owner at the end of the day?
No, only because I think that was a dream of his and a vision that he had for a very long time. And it makes sense. I think maybe some people were surprised where he ended up, although it's been really interesting to see how he's been handling it. But yesterday, the announcement that got me excited was all the women out in LA buying the LA soccer team and seeing that mix of celebrity like Natalie Portman and Jennifer Garner, but with Abby Wambach and Mia Hamm and Serena Williams buying that team. And I think that was really groundbreaking. And you're seeing a lot of athletes look at ownership and being a part of these franchises.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. We got hit at 5. It was 8 o'clock last night. I was texting my office. We got hit with an athlete who was ahead of that curve. I hate to use the word curve today, but ahead of the curve of the announcement and all. And he is a prominent athlete. He's married to a prominent athlete, about attaching to the female soccer league. While we're there, and this is not scripted at all, not that everything here is scripted and all, but we have an idea of what we're going to say. What do you think about the female league here? Does it work?
Yeah, I think the problem that they face is the coverage, right? Like less than 3% of all coverage in sports is on women and female athletes. And even like when there's not a lot of sports going on right now, it's incredible that the National Women's Soccer League has a deal with CBS. But the majority of their games are on CBS All Access. So it's behind a paywall. And if you're trying to bring visibility to female athletes and female sports, we're starting to see great movement in that direction, but you really need to know who these women are in order to care. And we need to see a lot of the media outlets doing a better job of telling their stories and covering their games and making adjustments when there's cornhole on the weekends on ESPN, but not all of the women's soccer league teams are being played. I find that strange.
Yeah, I went from watching the cornhole without the mask to cornhole with the mask. And I was like, okay, now I'm dropping to all-time lows in my life right now of trying to watch. But that was it. I remember in the middle of March, that's what we dealt with and all. You brought up one other interesting point. I just want to get your point of view in terms of athletes investing in private equity opportunities and thinking outside the box like LeBron does. And a lot of people are doing it. There's a group out of JP Morgan that's running specifically a group of tracking. It's helping an athlete track private equity investments and then doing the research, doing the knowledge, and then, figuring out if it makes sense. But I guess we've seen a lot more in the last 5 to 10 years than we've ever saw in this area. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, I think, it's funny, when I represented athletes, the last thing I would do would ask them to invest in something. It felt like such a unknown, it was very risky especially if you're not a part of the companies that are being incubated or built, to have an athlete put their money in. And now it's so common, and I think it's super smart if you can invest in the right things and have the right team around you advising you. But you're seeing companies like Beyond Meat is a great example, where they've grown so much, but they authentically have athletes invested that are either vegetarian or vegan. You have DeAndre Jordan, Chris Paul, Malcolm Jenkins, Maya Moore. There's like 25 plus athletes invested in them. And then even on the other side, you see companies like that based on like kind of what I was saying before. There was a great documentary last year on Netflix called Game Changers. And it was all about the vegan movement. And when you really dig into it, Beyond Meat was a big part of it. And Chris Paul was one of the producers on it. So you're seeing these companies get really creative and getting these athletes, which is super smart. If they believe in your product, that is such a much more smart way to engage these athletes, because then they're going to share on social. They're going to be doing so much more authentically, and then they're building a business. They're building enterprise through their influence in such a smart way with products they really believe in. And yeah, you're seeing, to me, that is the future, how athletes are. And if they have skin in the game, that's when it's not that traditional transactional relationship that fans are very keen on, and they don't buy into it. So it doesn't help the brand grow anyway.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think having the skin in the game, it does a couple things. One, it shows that the person who you're contracting with, that the player is going to be involved, but it also then keeps the player involved. We've worked with enough athletes in our day that, you know, if they have money invested in something, they're going to tend to do something more because they have their own cash in the game. And I think that's what changes things a lot now. You know, you used to doing the deals where you sweat for equity, sweat equity deals. The athlete provides the sweat, he gets paid in equity. And if he got tied to the deal, he didn't really care about the equity. But if you attach his own money into the game, into the business, I think it changes the likelihood of success and all. Dave, let's flip back to you for a moment and all, and let's discuss. We alluded to this, the true revenue share model for the four major sports and all, and let's get right into baseball. I mean, you were pretty prominent at the Mets for years and all, for I think close to 18 years, and helped run Madison Square Garden. So you were a fixture in New York sports and all. I was talking to a friend who's a partner, one of the minority owners in the Pittsburgh Pirates. And he asked me, you know, I'm involved with the Yankees. And he said, he actually thanked me. He said, thanks for the money. I said, what money? I didn't give you any money. What money are you talking about? He said, the luxury tax that the Yankees paid, I put into my pocket. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, well, the Yankees pay a luxury tax, right? I said, yeah, the Mets do, the Yankees do, Chicago does, Boston does, LA does. He goes, yeah, we got a check at the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I said, well, what do you do with that money? He said, well, we distribute it to our partners. I said, well, that's pretty crazy. The whole idea of a luxury tax is not to penalize, it's to penalize the people who are overspending, but to give the money to the small cap team or the smaller teams, you know, to take the money and roll it back as an investment, not to put in your pocket. What do you think? I mean, you were actively involved in those negotiations. What do you think about all that?
Barry, it was one of the most amazing negotiations, because there was a major issue. Even before we talked to the players, there was a major negotiation among the owners about what the plan should be. And that the ultimate objective was to get some sort of cost control or even a drag on payroll. And so it was a combination of, it was primarily an internal revenue share plan, but the large market teams, and quite frankly, there was a large market and middle market team sort of consortium that said, we're fine with paying money in because the recipient teams it's a small number. It's usually 4 or 5 of the bottom teams. We're fine with paying that money in as long as we get the benefit of cost reduction or cost certainty on the payroll side. And the small market teams were concerned because that cost certainty was going to come probably with an increased obligation on their part on the payroll side. They weren't sure that what they're going to be getting in the transfer was going to be sufficient to cover it. Lo and behold, at the end of the day, we get this pretty significant revenue sharing luxury tax program that has no obligation on the recipient clubs to reinvest that in payroll, and no drag, much less cost containment on player payroll. It was worst case scenario for the large market teams. And when I was at the Mets, and by the way, I was there 21 years. I was there, when I was there, especially when we got into the City Field years, when the revenue generation was off the charts, largest naming rights deal in baseball, quite frankly, all of sports at that point. Obviously, SNY was a significant revenue uptick. and we were selling out everything suite tickets. Our essential cost on the revenue share side was a tax of approximately 35% of that defined revenue. 35%. Think about what that does, to your the Mets or the large markets. Yankees, obviously, perfect illustration. That's a massive hit on the bottom line, massive. And the money gets moved to these 5 smaller market teams. By the way, they're not necessarily small markets. Miami, in particular, is not a small market in terms of size. It is in revenue generation. And they would receive this windfall, and you wouldn't necessarily see it in payroll. It would drop to the bottom line. It's a transfer of profitability. It's actually incredible. I mean, it really isn't sustainable. It shouldn't be sustained because the biggest issue there, however, is not so much on the owner side. It is the relation between the players and the owners. And it goes back to the Marvin Miller days and, the notion of salary cap, salary cap. It's a term. It's such an emotive term to the players. And it is to them, they will never agree to a salary cap program. However, if you change the discourse and talk about partnership, revenue share, literally partners in revenue, open the books, totally transparent approach, it's the way to go. And by the way, it's the only way to go, because quite frankly, the owners are paying basically that and more to their players as it is now. You might as well open the books and do it so that everyone's interests are aligned and the players have the incentive to grow the game and grow the revenue.
It's interesting. You go back to the days of the baseball unions and all, and I don't know if many people know who are listening in. The union started in Pittsburgh, and it was the steel unions, and that's where Marvin Miller came out of. And there was a second in command was a guy named Dick Moss, who I got to be very, very friendly with for years and all. And he was actively involved as in the union in the beginning with Marvin, and then became later an agent and then an arbitrator. And we got to be really good friends. He once said to me, he said, just don't ever use the word salary cap. Just call it something else, but don't call it a salary cap. And I think you're right. I think if you think about what's going to go on you're seeing that in all the other major sports right now, but in MLB right now, it's almost like a 4-letter word. But you have to have some type of revenue share, and the luxury tax has to get fixed, based on the issues that we see right now. How do you suspect the 2021 CBA negotiations to change all this? Do you see this all changing around for baseball?
I would think it's a challenge. It would have been a challenge even if we didn't have a pandemic. That puts a gloss over this that it's almost impossible to predict how that's going to play out. Baseball, probably more so than the other sports, is dependent upon locally generated revenue, far more certainly than football, and even certainly more than the NBA. NHL is probably similar because their national and media revenues are not at the level of the other sports. So if you have a situation where the no fan model continues into the 21 season, the loss magnitude is going to be so significant that the owners ultimately in a collective bargaining negotiation is always a question of what you're willing to put at risk. If they're losing at that level, I think it's a shutdown of the season is not out of the realm of possibility, just because that might actually be a way to minimize loss. Because again, if you have no revenue or no locally generated revenue other than media, and you're paying players at full freight, that model doesn't work.
Jaymee, let's go back to something that we were talking about with Derek. There was while Derek played in the shortstop position, there was a guy, if you're facing home plate to the right of him, who played third base, named A-Rod. And I got a chance to spend some time with Alex and all recently. And I noticed, like, in the last couple of days, he comes out and crosses over to the owner side all of a sudden. He alluded to some type of cap. And what, Jaymee, you've dealt with players like who are true to their word and all, but when you see a player change their song when they leave the game so like automatic, like they almost forget where they came from. And then Alex, I mean, how do you, I mean, do you, listen, I don't think you've ever had any problem with that with Derek, but when a player, when you're counseling a player that goes from an active player to joining management or even media, we saw that with Teixeira, where he was this pro-union guy, and all of a sudden now he's working for ESPN, and he's changed his model of like, you know, he almost has to be like, you know, right down the middle and all. You know, he's not a Republican, not a Democrat. He's just a reporter. You know, he's not Fox or CNN. He's just trying to do his job and all and trying to be independent. How do you counsel players on situations like that? Or do we just not counsel them and they do whatever they want? You tell me.
I just feel like those are two examples of, like, I could see that happening with both of them. I don't think that's as normal. I do think that athletes, like anyone, they may grow and evolve and change as a lot of them start playing when they're so young. I think when you're seeing them though, like start looking at their transition into their post-career, you know, it's interesting because I think that for so many athletes, that's where there's such a commonality where they've played their whole life with everything being done for them, knowing everything that was going to happen the next day. And then all of a sudden when they retire and go through this transition, it's really daunting. And so you see some athletes that know what they want to do and immediately go into action and start to, whether it's broadcast or management or whatever it may be. And then you see a lot of athletes just try to figure out what they want to do when, you know, they still have their whole lives ahead of them. And so that would be my advice, is to really just take a second and know that there's so much opportunity for them. Like most of them, when they retire in their 30s, and I think it's important for them to evaluate what they want personally and professionally and know that there's so much opportunity. I think the two people that you gave examples with are just unique. When you see someone like, now of course I'm not remembering his name, one of the biggest NFL contracts now in broadcast on ESPN, Tony Romo,
Yeah.
and so successful and so talented. To me, that's a really great example, because I think people are surprised. I don't know why, but I think that it's funny when you see the media and the fans get surprised when someone like Tony, who's played for so many years and played with all the athletes that are on the field, is doing such a great job at covering the games. It's such a natural next extension. And when you do it well, like Tony is, I think it's incredible.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that was a surprise for a lot of people, and to see the magnitude of his contract that he got for, you know, the play-by-play and the color commentary, it's well-deserved of the work that he put into it. And, you know, it did this a transition, and then they have to start speaking they have to be a little bit more fan-friendly, but they also have to be you know, people want to see you know, not necessarily the uniqueness, but they want to see the positive understanding that they have to be more down the middle as opposed to one-sided in their comments. They can't talk as a player. They're not talking as an owner, but they're giving both sides, and they're being very subjective versus objective, I find, which is interesting. Jason, you showed me some slides a couple of weeks ago that I was astounded. You know, listen, we all lived through the last 3 months of COVID and all, and it was probably early on in COVID that the stock market actually dropped 10% in one day, and I think everybody immediately ran to their 401k accounts and they said, "What is going on here?" What was going through your mind, and where we are right now compared to you know, what was happening? Let's go back. I see that you put a chart together going back since 2016. Take us through it.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. So the first 3 months of the COVID crisis felt very much like the beginning of other financial setbacks, whether it was the Great Recession in 2008, Brexit in 2016, or even the trade wars that we saw at the end of 2018. And from my perspective, a small amount of clients panicked, but for the most part, clients who we worked with who had a sound financial plan that really best aligned with their goals found themselves took this as an opportunity and used the volatility as a chance to rebalance for the future. It was really those clients who seemingly believe that the market always goes up, who found themselves completely offsides from a risk perspective. And it really reinforced the fact of having a trusted advisor in your corner, really regardless of the size of your balance sheet. It really emphasized that point. I will say one huge difference from this crisis to other crises is that COVID impacted many people personally, and client conversations often combined a fear of losing money with a fear of personal well-being. And the emotional toll that the COVID crisis took on many of my clients was something that you can never really prepare for. And it just really reinforces the importance of having a great team around you, whether you're a professional athlete or just a regular investor, to really help you guide, to really help guide you through the volatility. And in terms of the future, it's completely unpredictable. There is this clear dichotomy between what the economic and health data is telling us versus what the S&P 500 is telling us. It's really quite remarkable if you think about it. So as of right now, let's just say that the overall markets in the US are more or less flat for the year, but not all aspects of the market have behaved the same. So for example, large cap technology stocks are up almost 20% this year, while small cap stocks are down almost 18%. And even though the S&P 500 is pretty much back to flat, 2/3 of the stocks are actually negative for the year, despite the recovery. And just one point that I really want to emphasize, despite everything else that we might say, the main objective of any disciplined long-term investor should be to stay balanced and hold a diversified portfolio that's appropriate for their financial goals. And really, if you do that, you should be able to weather all of these crises, regardless of what the ramifications might actually end up being.
Was it normal for, so if I look at the V that you built here for the COVID period and all, was it normal a month? You know, what was the turnaround there from top to bottom there? That the bottom was March, and you're dealing with what, 3 or 4 months?
3 or 4 months, and we actually have another slide that we can put up that will show you that that's actually the average recovery. So typically, when you see large scale market corrections, the market tends to fall about 14% during the average correction, and it takes about 4 months on average for markets to come back. And this looks at every market correction since World War II. Obviously, there's anomalies to this, like the Great Recession of 2008, when some markets took 2 or 3 years to recover. But if you strip out what the actual crisis is and just say, okay, great, we have a market correction, from a stock market perspective, the current COVID-19 crisis has actually acted and looked very much like many others over the years. And we were more or less prepared to help our clients figure out how to best manage their portfolios and lifestyles through this.
That's very helpful. Why don't we do this? We have about 15 minutes left. Why don't we turn to some of the questions from the audience and all. And Aaron or Kate. Well, Kate, why don't we start with you? I think you had a question from for Jaymee.
Yeah, definitely. Jaymee, in a recent publication from the Players Tribune focusing on the Elena Della Donna story, this story, an article focused on the balancing act of returning to sports under these conditions while being significantly immunocompromised. Simply put, athletes, along with others, are facing the decision, do I risk my health and the health of others for a paycheck? How do you think athletes are thinking about this decision right now, even if they don't fall in the at-risk category or are completely healthy at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's been, I think there's a challenge right now. I think a lot of the female athletes have a bigger challenge because they're not always, they don't have as much money saved up. They don't have as much guaranteed contracts. Elena is is in a better situation, but it was a really not a great precedent. They ended up doing the right thing, the WNBA, but I think by not, allowing her to sit out was not a great precedent to set. But yeah, I think it's a challenge. I think there's a lot going on in this world right now, and a lot of athletes you're seeing them not playing. Ian Desmond on MLB, and just a lot of athletes are really just, I think, having a lot of internal conflict on what to do. And I think we'll continue to see that over the next 6 months. It's very unsure times.
All right, thank you.
Aaron?
Yep. So Jason, previously crises have been, they've been in times when athletes haven't actually been impacted, in the sense that actually athletes and sports were kind of looked at as a coping mechanism for a lot of people. This time, obviously, that's not the case, and it's taken an incredible lengthy period to get back on the field. How have you managed athletes and their balance sheets in the times when salaries in previous crises weren't really thought of to be, not guaranteed, whereas now it's not necessarily a sure thing that they're going to be getting their paychecks?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. And we talk all the time about what makes this crises different from all others, especially in the world of sports. And this is really the first one where sports were directly impacted. 9/11, hurricanes, natural disasters. It doesn't really matter what the event was. The sports always continued. And now all of the sudden we have a pandemic, and leagues and athletes who thought or were relying upon guaranteed salaries, the leagues simply might not be able to pay. And athletes are really unique clients. And as Jaymee said earlier, they often have a very short window to capitalize on a lifetime of earnings. And we could talk about countless examples of athletes with 8-figure balance sheets who were seemingly broke soon after retirement because of simple mistakes that could have been avoided. And when we meet with athletes, and what we hope others when they meet with athletes do, before we invest $1, is we have detailed conversations about budgets and financial plans. And we won't move forward with working with a client without a buy-in on these plans. And we're so incredibly diligent on making sure they're adhered to, even if we have to tell a high profile client the word no. And in the end, they always thank us for the discipline. And one thing we always do from the beginning as well is we start the education process from the first dollar invested, and strongly encourage a massive savings initiative during the playing years. There was a great quote from Joanne Williams of the Patriots last year, when he said that he'd rather live for a prince for the rest of his life than like a king during his NFL career, and then go back to square zero. And that's exactly how we think about balance sheets for athletes. As it relates to COVID specifically, one thing we're really doing, and we're being very aggressive on, is we're advising clients to allocate more capital than they normally would to a liquidity bucket that really has ample cash if their leagues are unable to pay. And we're focusing less on that longevity bucket that might include money for investment, or a legacy bucket where we might help them set up foundations or work on generational wealth planning. We're really emphasizing the importance of having liquidity. And it's really not just a message for athletes. It's something that other investors can work on as well, but especially for athletes where their earnings potential is in such a short window for a large majority. We're really reinforcing this liquidity on hand and not relying on the leagues to potentially pay out full salaries.
It's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, we spoke about Adam Silver making that conscious decision to close down the season. You saw the picture of Mark Cuban in almost like, surprise mode, like, what's going on here? You saw an NBA game getting canceled, right before tip-off, sending the players back to the locker room. From what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing internally, people are just checking the box. Listen, sports is important to get back to some type of normality, where Adam certainly was the person who stepped up and said, listen, this is a serious thing. And when he did it, it caught my attention really quick. It was like, this is serious stuff. It went from, seeing, I forget the first time I saw a mask this year, I'm like, oh, that's odd, to, okay, now I get it. Like, this is game on. I think, what's happening is that we'll go through, we'll have the sports, you'll have the no fans in the crowd and all. We're in an area right now, or a time right now, that my grandchildren will remember these days. Though I have a 2-year-old granddaughter who's wearing a mask right now. And she, you tend not to remember things from that early, but I got to figure she's going to remember wearing a mask. And, I have children in their 20s and 30s, and they really don't remember 9/11. Some of them do, but they see the effects of it when you go through a TSA, and you're the third person in, and they take your, I watched a lady in front of me getting her fancy Gucci bag being tested for explosives. And my wife saying, that's odd. I said, it's just percentages. It's odds. That's what it is. But what I think what's going to go on this year in sports is that the players are just going to check the box. They don't want to give up their salary, and they want to play to get their money. And owners are going to do everything possible to get the sport back in. I don't know listen, I'm hoping that we have a competitive year, but the people I've spoken to is just like, the quicker I'm out of this bubble, the better off I am. Like, I'm doing it for the money, and I'm out of it for the money. Like, I'm not looking to stay around. I'm doing my job. I'm doing it. And, it's unfortunate that we're dealing with this, but, I think we're all grateful that we're able to get through all this as a nation and as the world. Let's do this. Let's go to Catherine. I think you had another question up from the audience.
Yeah, definitely. Specifically, do you think the University of Michigan, particularly the athletic department, will deal with the millions of lost revenue from ticket sales in football and the impact that it has moving forward on other sports?
So, Dave, why don't we turn that to you? You cut out a little, Catherine, but it stemmed around college sports and football and all, and the changes that you'll see there. I mean, it's unknown listen, universities are making some major decisions right now, and based on the health of the student, and then you read about it, it's really the health of the professor or the teacher, who is more at risk, not the students at risk. There is some risk to a young student today, but the odds are is minuscule about a college student passing from COVID. The percentages go a lot higher when you're dealing with the professors, but now you have college sports and all, which is a major part of a revenue. It's a business. Let's just face it. The University of Michigan football is a money-making business and all. You don't have fans. You do have fans. Is this have a trickle-down effect? The other thing is I saw that Stanford is, for the first time, has knocked down half of their sports and say, listen, we're not running the bottom tier of our sports, and they for years and years have won the award for the most amount of NCAA championships per university and all. But they're saying, listen, we can't afford to run this. It's not worth it. Take us through where you see college sports today.
I think it's a significant challenge. Football, you're right. Football, especially in the Power 5 conferences, football drives the car. I mean, it's the main revenue generator. Basketball is one, but when you think about the large majority of the other sports, they're cost centers. They're not profit centers, and that's why I think you're seeing every effort being made to play college football this fall, and ideally with some degree of fans in the stands. The Ivy League, you mentioned Adam Silver's decision. The Ivy League has also been one of these early movers in making these decisions. And the Ivy League, a couple of weeks ago, making the decision of no fall sports. A lot of times they're out front on this, and it might suggest it comes to that. I got to believe that in the major power conference situations, if they can't play in the fall, they will play in the spring, because the revenue is too important to their, quite frankly, the survival of the athletic programs. I think the other option and the other resource, in addition to cutting costs, as you mentioned, Stanford cutting 11 varsity teams, that was shocking. because you're right. They win that Learfield Cup every year because they have this massive number of athletic. They're in some sports that other schools aren't in. That is no longer the case. So it'll be interesting to see who now the new leader is in the Learfield Cup. But in addition to cost cutting, the other area is going to be raising other revenue, and that's going to be on the development office side and reaching out to the alumni. Michigan, fortunately, has an incredible alumni network to step up and help them ride this out, because it's hard otherwise to think of how that's going to be replaced. You talk about bowl games and the March Madness tournament. That's NCAA level. In football, it does go to the teams, and quite frankly, it helps the leagues of the participating teams. But not going. It's not going to replace 115,000 people in the Big House for 8 or 9 games for the University of Michigan. That's a massive amount of revenue that needs to be somehow recouped.
We thank you, Dave. We appreciate your time today. Jaymee, the same. Aaron, the same. We appreciate Jason, the same, and Aaron and Kate. We appreciate your time today helping out. And in 2 weeks, we're going to switch to technology and sports. And thank you, and go blue. Thanks.